let's try and get this started. Well, welcome everyone. This is the July 2019 edition of our virtual lecture series. This evening we have Richard Wright. Richard is a senior software engineer and product developer with Software Disk. He's a lifetime amateur astronomer and avid astro imager. He's literally written the book on revealing the universe through astrophotography. Do you have a copy to hold up?
No.
You're just not ready for these product placements.
No, sorry.
Richard indulges his passion for astroimaging at his dark sky camp / observatory in Okeechobee, however it's pronounced, Florida. And you can find samples of his imaging work on his webpage, eveningshow.com. So please join me in welcoming Richard Wright.
Thanks, guys. Okay, so this is going to be introduction to astrophotography. I'm not going to get into anything. There is one math equation, only one math equation, and it's middle school math. So other than that, we're not going to dig too deep. This is mostly going to be about common pitfalls and stumbling blocks that people come across. If you're interested in maybe getting into astrophotography, this would be a good primer for you, just so that you have some idea of how things work and what you might be interested in. So on my next slide, I have a picture. I have two photographs on the next slide. The one on the left I took at a science fair I was helping with. There's a radio observatory up in North Carolina that I volunteer for, and they have one of the world's largest plate archives. And they had this photo out, this plate and a little loop, and they were having kids look at the loop, and there's this little galaxy pair on the loop, and I'm like, hey, that would be a cool little galaxy pair to image, just to compare. And so the image on the right is my photograph of these, and this is a few years old. Actually, I took this maybe about 6 years ago now. But this is how far we've come. The image on the left was taken in 1977. This is glass photographic plate in an observatory that costs millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to build. And this is when Star Wars was out in movie theaters. And the image on the other side I took with a Celestron Edge HD and an off-the-shelf CCD camera out in the middle of a field by a state park in South Florida. And the net cost being a few $1,000s. So it's most of us remember when Star Wars came out. And this is how far astrophotography has come from the time Star Wars was in movie theaters in the mid-70s until the early 2000s when I took this picture on the right-hand side, which is quite a ways. Actually, they hung this picture up in the museum. They made a print of it to show this very thing. Look how far we've come in such a short amount of time in what amateurs can do compared to what professionals could do only a few years ago. So our roadmap is simply, what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about, on the next slide, we're going to talk about how we gather light and how we record light, and then a little bit about stretching and stacking and tracking. Again, this is not going to be a Photoshop tutorial. There's not going to be any, we're not going to go, I just want you to understand what's happening and what the basic premise of these things are. And a little bit about lucky imaging. I got accused of being fresh, actually. I was talking about lucky imaging, and they were like, what are you talking about? That doesn't sound like a real thing. It is a real thing, and I'll tell you about it at the end. So let's start with gathering light, optics by the numbers. If you're a photographer, we turn things around for astrophotography. In the camera world, a 200 millimeter camera lens is 200 millimeters focal length. So my first bullet just simply says that. So if you see a camera lens for sale and it says it's a 200 millimeter lens, it just simply means the focal length of that lens is 200 millimeters. And what that affects is two things. The scale of your image, it basically makes small things large. So it allows you to zoom in on birds. It allows you to zoom in on galaxies and to zoom in on moon craters. So moving on down the bullet list, if you see a telescope that is marked as a 200 millimeter telescope, that's talking about the aperture telescope, not the focal length. Aperture affects how much light gathering power is. How big is the opening? In this image, it's actually a 200 millimeter telescope and a 300 millimeter lens. And as you can see, the 200 millimeter telescope is letting a lot more light in than the 300 millimeter lens up above it. So go ahead through the rest of these bullets, Claude. So it basically makes makes dim things bright. Telescopes work very different than, say, a microscope. A microscope's main job is to magnify things. And when you magnify things, it's not the same as resizing the image in Photoshop. When you magnify an image coming from a light source, you're spreading the light out. And when you spread the light out, you make the light thin. Think of it as a pile of pizza dough. The bigger you try to make that pizza crust, the thinner that crust gets until basically it starts to fall apart. Well, the same thing happens with an image from a telescope. If you try to magnify it, you don't have enough light. The image basically gets thinner and thinner and dimmer until it pretty much falls apart and you really can't see anything. With a microscope, we fix this. It's a very easy problem. You just shine lots of light on whatever it is. So if you have your slide with your paramecium on it, you just shine lots and lots of light on that thing and you can magnify it to your heart's content. But if you're looking at, say, the Helix Nebula or the Andromeda Galaxy, you can't shine more light on that object to make it look brighter so that you can magnify it. You need lots and lots of aperture. You need a telescope that's bigger around in order to gather more light so that you can see it or take a photograph of it quickly. On the next slide, I have one of the best examples of this that I ever came up with, and I did this by accident. I was in my own backyard shooting some narrowband during the full moon. And I was shooting this Heart Nebula here. And this Heart Nebula image is a single 20-minute exposure. And I was kind of showing off with some fancy equipment. I can go 20 minutes without guiding and blah, 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 blah. But the point is, 20 minutes of light to collect this image that you see on the right-hand side. And then, well, it was full moon. And the wavelength I was shooting at, of course, you could shoot nebula with the moon. So I turned it at the moon and I took a picture of the moon as well. And the picture of the nebula is 20 minutes. And the photo of the moon is 1/30th of a second. And that by itself is quite a big difference in exposure time. But here's the thing too, the image of the Heart Nebula was mostly dark. You couldn't really see it. So I had to stretch it, or I had to brighten it. So that's where you take that brighten tab, Photoshop, you brighten slightly in Photoshop or whatever, and you drag it up. So if you do what we call photometry on this, between the moon and the nebula, between the exposure time and the amount of brightening that I had to do to make this visible on the screen, the moon is 800,000 times brighter than this nebula is. So when we shoot these deep sky objects, it's not necessarily the magnification, it's how much light does the telescope gather. Also, I want to mention for you amateur astronomers, no, the moon is never, ever, ever right next to the Heart Nebula. This isn't possible. The nebula is in the northern skies, nowhere near the ecliptic. So I simply zoomed the telescope over to the moon and took a picture, and I didn't change the scale, so I didn't have to crop it, but I just popped the moon right in there with the same scale. So this is actually a good demonstration too of how large some of these deep skies objects are. A lot of people see these photographs and they're, wow, what magnification was that? Well, most of the things that we shoot in the sky are actually fairly good size, so we don't do a whole lot of magnifying for reasons that we'll talk about later. So my next slide is we'll talk about brightness. So how does this focal length and aperture relate to each other? So my first bullet, focal ratio is the focal length divided by the aperture of the telescope. So my next bullet, so for example, a 600 millimeters telescope, 600 millimeter focal length telescope with a 200 millimeter aperture would be f3. I think this is going to be a pretty fast focal ratio. On the other hand, the next, a 2,000 millimeter focal length telescope, a lot of like say 8-inch SCTs from Meade or Celestron or these types of telescopes, they have a 200 millimeter aperture as well. That's 8 inches, about 2,000 millimeter focal length, and so those are f10. That's the focal ratio, and the focal ratio it's really cool. It's a magical number because the smaller it doesn't matter the size of your optic. Whatever that ratio determines how bright the image is. Going to show up either on your eye, on photographic film or plates, or on the camera sensor. It's a measure of how concentrated the light is going to be at the image plane. So my next few bullets here, the lower the better. Less than about f5 is generally considered fast, and greater than f7 is generally considered slow. And this is very subjective. You could quip that, well, f4 or better is actually fast, or you could say that, well, you got to be at least f10 to be considered slow. So it's somewhat subjective, but in general, that's about where we kind of draw the line. f10 is definitely considered optically, as far as photography goes, a fairly slow telescope. We would want to shoot really bright objects with an f10 optic, like the moon, planets. Shooting faint, deep sky objects at f10 is making it very difficult on yourself. You're going to want a little bit faster optic than that. So my last bullet here, of course, just says simply faster is better because that's where we want to be. So my next slide, this is the thing that was really cool to wrap my head around. I remember when somebody explained this to me and I didn't believe it. A large aperture telescope will give you just as bright an image as a small aperture telescope if they both have the same focal ratio. Now, I'm being very careful to say it will give you just as bright an image. It's not the same image. You can see the image on the upper left is much larger than the image at the lower right. And that's because if we want to magnify a galaxy and make it really big and bright, we have to have a large aperture to capture all that light. A very small aperture telescope can produce just as bright an image, but it doesn't spread the light out because it's a shorter focal length. And so then out of that light is all bunched up, and so it looks bright. On my next slide, I'll show you what happens if you try to take that tiny telescope and you spread it out and magnify it. Well, I'll just put a Barlow lens in there. Well, when you do that, you change the focal length, and when you change the focal length, you change the focal ratio, and so now you have a slower optic, and you'll have less light to work with because you're spreading it out. Again, we're talking about physical light coming into the telescope. It doesn't work the same as just resizing the image in Photoshop or GIMP or Paint. If you have a focal reducer on your telescope, it works the opposite. It'll take a long focal length telescope and shorten the focal length, which concentrates the light smaller, which will give you a brighter but smaller image. You don't get a free lunch with a focal reducer either because your optic can only really capture so much of an area of sky. And if you get too carried away with a focal reducer, what you get is a little bitty bright image surrounded by a lot of darkness because you're not getting the full field out of that optic. Okay, so let's talk about different types of telescope designs. And again, this is the 40,000 foot overview of these telescopes. Refractors, my favorite type of telescope is a refractor. These are all glass and lenses on my first bullet, and my second bullet says one of the hallmarks of a quality refractor is exceptional contrast and sharpness. You really can't beat a high-quality refractor in terms of contrast and sharpness. Now, of course, there's trade-offs. So let's look at some of the trade-offs. First, there's field curvature. It does not focus the light into a flat plane on the camera, so you're going to need a flattener. If you're using a refractor visually, a lot of eyepieces will flatten the field out satisfactorily, Plus, when you're using a refractor visually, you're usually looking at what's in the middle of the field anyway. If you're taking a photograph, you're going to be a little bit more peculiar about that. You're going to want the field all across your image sensor to be nice and flat. What I mean by that is you want nice sharp stars in the middle, and you want nice sharp stars at the edge as well. You don't want round stars in the middle and elongated stars out at the edge either. We also get something called chromatic aberration. What that means in English is color smearing, best way to do it. A low quality refractor will smear the colors out a little bit. A high quality refractor will keep all of the colors nice and fine. In fact, we generally divide refractors into two categories: apochromats or apos, and achromats. So an apochromat generally corrects, as much color as possible: red, green, and blue, all well corrected, all focused at the same place. Really high quality refractors, the upper echelon, will also correct infrared and UV light as well, so you can actually have quite a bit more than just the visual spectrum that's available. We also have achromats. Achromats are a little bit more budget friendly. They typically will correct red and green, but not the blue. So the next bullet should be a picture of the moon with a purple haze around it. I hope the purple haze comes out.
We do see it.
Your eye is not as sensitive to blue as it is to green and red. And so an achromat can produce wonderful visual images. And unless you're on something really bright, you're not going to see a blue halo around it. However, with photographs, the camera is not very forgiving. And so an achromat sometimes will show some color fringing around stars and around bright objects. A really good test of a high-quality apo is to look at the edge of the moon, again with a good quality eyepiece to match, and see if there's any blue or green haze along the limb of the moon. And a really expensive refractor that's good quality, you won't see any haze there at all. I'm going to kind of foreshadow a topic. If you're shooting with a camera if you're shooting mono with filters, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, you're only shooting at one band of color at a time. And an achromat actually is a really good budget way to get a very high quality refractor. You just simply refocus for each filter. So your red, green, and blue, you refocus your monochrome camera with the red, green, and blue filter in front of it. And hopefully, if that doesn't make sense, it will make more sense when we get to a slide later on.
I would assume you'd need to do flat fields at each of those focuses.
Oh yes. If you're shooting with mono and filters, you have to shoot flats for each filter individually as well. Yeah. So I really love refractors. They're my favorite. They're also the most expensive, and at a certain point, it becomes impractical. The largest refractor I have is 6 inches. A friend has a 7-inch, and another friend has an 8-inch. And an 8-inch refractor would never get used. I would have to mount it over the fireplace and worship it, but I would never be able to take it outside. It's just simply too big, and it doesn't make any sense. Reflectors are a great alternative. How a reflector works is it has a front-coated mirror in the back. Usually it's parabolic. Occasionally, in really cheap reflectors, they're spherical. And what reflectors give you is exceptional color performance. So even a low-cost reflector with a cheap mirror will reflect all the wavelengths of light equally. So you don't get any separation of red, green, blue, and you can even delve into infrared and UV if you want. They all reflect perfectly well. Let's go through a couple of bullets here, Claude. They are very inexpensive to make. So you get actually better, a cheap reflector can outperform a medium cost refractor in terms of color performance. And reflectors are also really inexpensive to make. So what about some other trade-offs? Because you get great color performance and they're cheaper. So what are you trading off? Well, the sharpness and contrast isn't quite as good as it is with the refractor. However, they can be pretty good. You also get just your share of field aberration. We have something called coma. You get little comets in the corner. And so if you're going to have you shoot with the reflector, a Newtonian reflector being the most common, you're going to want to have a coma corrector in line. And this goes in front of your camera, usually a prescribed distance from your image sensor. Overall, reflectors give you the best performance to price ratio. As much as I love my refractors, I have a 12-inch Newtonian reflector, and it does great work. One of the field aberrations that we actually like are diffraction spikes. So the next bullet is a little picture of the Pleiades here. And I think, personally, a lot of open clusters are really boring. Just it's a bunch of stars. The Pleiades being an exception, of course, because they have all that nebulosity around it. But if you shoot some of these clusters with the Newtonian, you see the little cross section at the front of the mount there? That creates diffraction spikes in the image. That gives you that little cross over the top of these bright stars. And that's technically a field aberration, and it does degrade the contrast of your image. But they're quite nice aesthetically, and the degrading of your contrast usually isn't that bad. So they're a really great. It's a really great cost-performance ratio. If you want to get started, I think my top recommendation for a beginner scope is a short refractor, and next after that would be a reflector. The reflector is also required to be collimated, which means you've got to get the mirrors lined up, and that can be a little tedious for some beginners. I know when I was a beginner, I had a heck of a time collimating. If you're mechanically inclined, collimating isn't going to be much harder than tying your shoelaces. If you spend all your time in front of a computer like me, it's quite daunting. You should see me try to drive nails. I'm not really good at it. So it took me a while to learn to collimate, acceptably. I've got the hang of it now, so that's good. But it is, it could be a stumbling block, depends on your own particular aptitude. So we have reflectors and we have refractors. They both have their trade-offs. How about we mix them both together? So catioptric, however you say that word. It uses both mirrors and lenses. And what they are is an attempt to kind of play off the pros and cons against each other. Typically, these have a really compact form factor. They really kind of got started in the late 60s. I believe it was a guy at Celestron that came up with their first idea on how to make the corrective plate on the front. So that's a mirror on the back little tube. And the light travels in and bounces back to the front and then bounces back again. So the focal length of that telescope is actually 3 times longer than you see on the tube there. And there are all sorts of designs. There's Schmidt-Cassegrains and aplanic Schmidts, and there's the Rasa, and there's Cardi Anders, and there's the Max Katov. There are all sorts of different variations on this, and a very, very wide range of prices. You can spend from a couple of $100 on a small telescope like this, or you can spend up to many tens of thousands of dollars on a telescope like this. And of course, the performance will vary. Usually roughly in proportion to the amount of money that you spend on. Another good option for when you get into astrophotography is to just use a camera lens. Camera lenses are very cost effective. They're dual purpose. It's, again, if you're into photography, you're already shooting birds and birthday parties and things of that nature. You can point the camera lens at the sky. It works just fine. Here I show a Franken focuser thing I came up with, a belt and step motor. Actually, I didn't invent this, but I kind of cobbled this one together. But it's got a little stepper motor and a belt, and the computer actually turns the lens to focus it for me, which makes a pretty cool automated system. The nice thing about camera lenses is it's really hard to find. Actually, I need to modify this slide. It's hard to find telescopes under 400 millimeters in focal length that are well corrected. And I say that, and I've got a new Takahashi that's 360, and I just saw somebody else has a 360 millimeter scope. So maybe 200 millimeters. My favorite lens to shoot astronomy with is a 200 millimeter Canon prime lens. And at 200 millimeters, it's sort of the sweet spot between I'm taking pictures of the Milky Way and I'm taking pictures of deep sky objects. And it works just like a 200 millimeter refractor. Works very, very well. So let's talk about, actually I'm going to stop there for a second and actually, any questions about optics? We're about to change topics, so let's talk, if anybody's got a question about how telescopes work, we can talk about that while we're talking about telescopes.
I don't see any hands going up.
All right, everybody's good. Well then, let's talk about how cameras work. So camera sensors, basically it's a grid of pixels, just like on a computer display, pixels emit light to make pictures. And a camera sensor, pixels collect light to make pictures. So they're basically photon counters. If you have a 16 megapixel camera, you have 16 million photon counters, all laid out in a grid. And each one of these pixels receives photons, which is a little packet of light. I realize that may be a buzzword in some audiences. And the camera records this. Call it an ADU, analog to digital unit, or DN, digital number. It depends on if you're depends on what kind of engineer you are. But most people in the astronomy will call them ADUs. If you have a big pixel, it's more sensitive. It collects more light. Think of the pixels as a bucket. So I took this picture of two buckets that I have. One is a little bitty tiny bucket that like a dessert came in. The other is a giant bucket. Life stores massive quantities of cooking stuff. So which of these two buckets do you think would collect more light or would collect more rain in a rainstorm? The big bucket would. So in the same sense, large pixels are more sensitive. We seem to be on a tear for smaller and smaller pixels. We want more pixels because we want higher resolution. What a lot of people don't realize is when it comes to low light photography, we want large pixels, because large pixels are more sensitive and they'll collect more light. And more light, the more light we have, less noise we have, for reasons we'll talk about in a minute. Some of the popular cameras that are super sensitive, the Canon 1DX or the Sony Alpha that everybody's loving for nightscapes, they have giant 9 micron or bigger pixels. Whereas a lot of cell phone cameras have little 2 micron pixels, or the typical deep sky CCD camera, CMOS camera may only have 4 or 5 micron pixels. So the bigger the pixels are, the more sensitive they're going to be. Now, of course, it has a bucket collecting rain. What happens when too much rain falls in the bucket? The bucket overflows, and overflowing is bad. So if you want to know how much rain you had and have a 6-inch bucket and it fills all the way up, well, you know you had at least 6 inches of rain, but it really doesn't tell you if it was 7 inches or 70 inches. So you've lost information if you overflow your pixels. So we call this saturating when the pixels are overflowing. On the next slide, hopefully transition will work. There is a photo of the the Andromeda Galaxy. Lord have mercy. This is the Orion Nebula. And then click once. Yeah, there we go. And the middle is all blown out. And all that white flat area, these pixels are saturated. Now I did simulate this, so this is sort of a simulation. But this is actually what happened. All these pixels overflow, you lose all the color data. There's no way to recover this. If you have a really dim image, you can brighten it up. It looks noisy, but you can at least brighten it up. You can see some of what was there. If you overexpose, or your pixels overexpose, it's all white, it's all solid, and you can't get the data back. It's like trying to unbake a cake. Once it's done, and there's no going back. Typically, for imaging, the best performance, or the best results for data is done with a monochrome camera with filters in front of it. So in this image, I've got the hamburger galaxy, and so I'm going to take one image with the red filter in front of the camera, and another image with the green filter in front of the camera, and another filter with another picture with the blue filter. And then I'll combine those, and I give them an RGB image. And this is a hang-up for a lot of people, because like, I just want to take one picture and I want it to be color. And you can do that with a color camera. The mono cameras, you have to take at least 3 images, one at each wavelength, and you have to combine them after the fact. Next slide kind of shows what this looks like. You'll get these filters, and you put them in a little filter wheel, so it's usually round, and that filter wheel rotates in different filters in front of your camera sensor. Now, I was telling my wife about this, and she had a very understandable misunderstanding that I realized I should explain. A red filter doesn't filter out the red. Red filter lets only the red through. Again, it's kind of backward maybe from some other ways we would look at things. So a red filter gives us a red image, a green filter gives us a green image, and so on. And when you look at the image from a monochrome camera with these filters, they don't look color. So on the next slide, I show what these pictures actually look like. So I show you, this is your red, this is your green, this is your blue, and all these are the different intensities. It's the different intensities of the red light and the different intensities of the green. And at first glance, they really look the same. If you zoom in and really study them, you can see, well, they're not really the same. There's some areas that are redder than others, and so it will look more intense in the red image than the other. And we combine all those together to make our color image. Color cameras, though, are really great. They really simplify the workflow. And by that I mean, one is more work to take the pictures, and one is more work to put the pictures together afterwards. So on my next slide, I'm going to start talking a little bit about how color chips work. Bruce Bayer is sort of the father of the Bayer filter. He kind of invented color imaging. And what a color chip is, it's really a monochrome chip. Color filters over the pixels. So you can see in this little diagram, there's kind of a 4x4 area, and there's 2 green pixels in that area, and then 1 red pixel and blue pixel. So we usually, when we take a picture, we kind of get a hole in it. So on the next slide, I'm not sure if this is still up there, but there's a grid pattern on that picture, that gray picture. That's what raw data really looks like. If you take a raw DSLR image, you bring it into Photoshop, Photoshop colors it for you. You're not actually looking at the raw data. If you look at the raw data right off the camera sensor, it's black and white. And it has kind of a grid pattern because the red and the green are very bright, the blue is very dark, and when you look at it, it looks like the blue is actually black. It's just the pixels next to bright pixels. Kind of maybe a little bit how sunspots will be a dangerous group to make analogy with. So how do you make a color image out of this black and white grid? Well, it's interpolated, which means we use math to estimate the values of the pixels based on the color of the pixels around it, which means we're filling in the gaps, or we're estimating. And this might be called de-Bayer, it might be called de-Mosaic, or it might be called colorized, but we're basically inventing data. Now, I don't like this inventing of the data because my engineering sense is that's not really there, kind of making up what's in between. However, you can't really argue with the fact that every modern DSLR on the planet works this way. And there's lots of pictures on the cover of National Geographic where I'm not going to go, they made up some of that. That picture's terrible, or it's junk, or it doesn't. The algorithms work very well for filling the gaps. And it does a pretty good job on daylight images, and it can also do a pretty good job on landscape images as well. The thing I don't like about color, this is again my personal opinion, is if you think about it, a single exposure, you get 1/4 of red than if you had done a monochrome exposure with a red filter. And you get 1/4 with the blue, and you only get half of the green. So these images, they contain red, green, and blue data, but they don't really contain as much signal as a monochrome image would. If you do an experiment, if you took 3 images with a monochrome camera, just one red, one green, and one blue, and you combined them, and you took 3 images with a color camera and you combined them, you would actually get a cleaner, less noise image out of the monochrome data. Okay, so next, let's talk about stretching the data. This is very counterintuitive, and I didn't have any mentors when I first started taking pictures with cameras. And like everybody else, of course, I didn't buy a book and read about it. I just tried to figure it out on my own. This is, of course, before I went at software best. But when you look at these deep sky images, they're very dark. There's not a lot of signal. You're taking a picture of something very, very faint. Even though the camera is far more sensitive than your eye, it doesn't show up very bright. So we have to stretch the data. Stretch, there's a lot of ways to try to describe what the word stretch means. I think the simplest layman's term is brightening the image. Is we're just simply brightening the image, or we're upping the scale of the image. For the more technically minded, you typically do this in a non-linear way, which is why you see this curve on here. Some people get bent out of shape too about the fact that you're stretching it non-linear, and I like to tell them that the human visual system is also non-linear and adjusts greatly to different dynamic ranges. So what we're doing isn't so much cheating. If you had a bunch of photographers who took a picture of a bright set of clouds on the mountain range, they're also going to adjust those images with curves as well, and they're all going to look a little bit different. And if you were standing there looking at the clouds, you would probably see all of those variations as your eye focused on different areas in the cloud. But I'm being on a soapbox now, and it's somewhat subjective, and I don't want to start any fights. But the point is, you do have to stretch the data somehow because it's too dark to see, and so we need to make it much, much brighter. Typically, the cycle goes something like this. The next slide, we'll apply some curves. We'll maybe move the black point levels, check our color balance, and we'll sharpen it. We'll tweak the colors a little bit, and then we may repeat those if needed. There's a lot of people who will spend 10 or 15 or 20 hours in Photoshop working on their deep sky images. I don't do that. I think there's a diminishing point of returns. This is actually my formula. I'll curve it. I'll check the balance. I'll sharpen it. I might do some noise reduction. But if I spend more than 30 minutes working on an image, I feel like I didn't have good enough data to begin with. And I think a lot of people kind of get too carried away with the image processing. You know, I've got some good friends to teach workshops, and you can go a long way to get an image out of lackluster data. My personal philosophy is get good data to begin with. Of course, I have APOD, not 70 APOD, so maybe what do I know about that? But that's just the way, it's just the way I think. But this by itself will get you a good picture. This is a picture of N13. Next slide shows a larger picture of it, and you can even see the two little companion galaxies, and you can see the different blue and amber stars, and this is good focusing, good color balance. I didn't do with Lucy Richardson deconvolution and the crazy whack out super stretch thing and pixel sight. Those things are great, but you can get a nice image without having to resort to some of that voodoo. So don't fall into that trap either, where you think you have to do a great deal of processing. Now, so this is all great. This is a nice M13, fairly recent image of mine of M13. On the next slide, I'll show you my first image of M13 ever. This is what most people's first image of M13 actually looks like. And really, this is not as bad an image as it looks like. I think focus could have been a little bit better. But what this image has more of, the previous image didn't, is noise. You see all that grainy stuff in the background, and this is a very noisy image. It's a single exposure. The previous image was probably 20 or so short exposures all combined together. And that's where we're going to get into our math equation. So when you take an image, light falls on the sensor, and that light is signal. And the longer you expose, the more signal you get. But when you get signal, you also get noise. There's noise in the signal. There's different kinds of noise, and there's different ways of combating them. I'm not going to talk about all of them, but the one really important type of noise is called shot noise. And shot noise is sort of like rain falling on a sidewalk. If you get a little drizzle, you get a little splat of rain, and you see little drip drops everywhere. Well, think about the image of a galaxy falling on your camera sensor. It's exactly the same thing. Little photons flip-flop here and there and building up the image. And if you don't have a lot of light, you don't have a lot of raindrops on the driveway, and you don't have a very good picture of a galaxy. There's a lot of gaps in it, and it's not very even and smooth. If you get a big rainstorm and it dumps rain, your driveway is all wet. It's completely saturated, and it's glistening and wet. And if you get a whole bunch of photons from your galaxy, maybe from a fast optical system, or from exposing for a very long time, you get lots of photons from that galaxy, and you get a nice smooth image of that galaxy. The thing is, the galaxy is really, really faint, and so you really can't expose a single exposure long enough to get all the photons from that galaxy we need. There's a couple of things that sort of interfere with that idea. One is the sky is bright, and that light is added to the galaxy light, and you may saturate your camera while waiting for the galaxy to build up. The other is, depending on the type of mount you have, you may not be able to track that galaxy to where the stars are going to stay on the same pixel for a very long period of time. We can try guiding. There are limits to guiding, and really to get a nice smooth image of a galaxy, you may need several hours worth of exposure time. Now, as you expose, the signal goes up. As you expose, the noise also goes up. And this sounds contradictory to what you may have heard, because it's like, well, the signal goes up and the noise goes down. Oh, they both actually go up. Next slide, I show you the relationship. And the noise goes up much slower than the signal does. So even though they're both increasing, the noise goes up slower. And the straight line is the signal line. And you can see that just takes off and shoots up. That's a nice linear relation, just go straight up there. And then you can see the square root of that is a nice curve that just kind of floats off to the side. It looks like very early, the noise, the signal is going to outpace the noise. You're going to get a very nice image. I've seen some similar graphs where they graph this the other way, and there's a decay. It looks like what people call a diminishing point of return, where it doesn't do any good to take more than X number of exposures. And those are all assumptions based on simplifications of the actual physics that's going on. Because this graph where the signal is going up faster than the noise, it's not really the number of exposures. It's not really the length of the exposures. It is exactly what the graph says. It's the signal. As the signal goes up, it outpaces the noise. And in a single image, you can have multiple levels of signal. I can shoot the Andromeda galaxy with an f3 optic for 2 minutes. And in the middle of the galaxy, I've got so much signal, the image is nice and smooth. And as I go out towards the edge of the image, and I start the spiral arms and those dusty bands and those areas of blue, hot star, those are much dimmer, and I did not get as much signal in that part of the image, and those are much noisier. So how am I going to get a smooth image of Andromeda, not just in the middle of Andromeda? Is it 16 1-minute exposures? Is it 16 5-minute exposures? Is it 100 exposures that are a minute long? It depends on the signal that you're collecting. It depends on the object you're collecting. We really like to have rules of thumb, and there's some imagers that don't ever take more than 12 images, or don't ever take more than 24 images. And I'm like, well, is that 24-minute images or 24 10-minute images? And is that a bright object or is that a dim object? Is it a reflection nebula with some real wispy thing, or a galaxy with a star streamer hanging off the side? I don't believe in rules of thumb. I believe you should shoot the object and evaluate the data and look at how much data it is. Look at where you're going and then decide from that. It's like shooting birds. There's no rule of thumb for shooting birds. You have to be 30 feet away and you have to be shooting at f/16. So those rules are for people who want recipe books. Anyway, I'm getting on my soapbox. That was not part of the presentation, and now you've recorded it. Anyway, the signal and the noise both go up. However, the signal goes up faster than the noise.
But also, don't you get a readout noise every time you read out?
Yes. So we can talk a little bit about that, the different noise sources. So you have dark current noise. The primary sources of noise are your dark current noise, PRNU, which means photo response non-uniformity, and shot noise, and then read noise. And if your signal is not above how long do your exposures have to be? Well, they really only have to be long enough to get the signal you're interested in above the read noise. So the read noise from the camera is usually pretty low, but every readout you get a fixed amount of noise. It doesn't matter how long the exposure is, it's the same amount of noise.
So there must be some way to optimize the integration time to the number of individual images you take then. Right. Well, in the advanced course, I would go into that. Generally, it's a minimum. You're going to have to expose. You know, I can shoot 61 minute or 10 minutes, and the image is going to look pretty much the same with the modern camera. But if I tried to stack several thousand 1 second exposures, I would find that the read noise of the camera would interfere with that, and I would have a hard time getting that read noise really down to nothing. I could beat that read noise down a lot because there's a lot of exposures, but because your signal is only down around 1 or 2 electrons, and your noise is down around 3 or 4 electrons, you're going to have a difficult time pulling your signal out of that. So you have to get the signal you're interested in above the read noise. So it kind of sounds like what really is the driver on that is the drive accuracy of your telescope to keep from trailing your image. Right. How long can you go? Generally, the rule of thumb, if we want one, is expose for as long as you can. However, I don't like to do that either because I lose star color. The stars will saturate. And so if I can go 10 or 15 minutes, I find my stars are all saturated, so I get kind of a blue halo and then a big white blob. And so I don't get good looking stars with that. I usually start, and I know I have a Paramount, I have several Paramounts, and we're famed for being able to go very long and unguided. But I'll shoot just like 3 minutes, and I'll look at that. Is everything in there in 3 minutes? And if so, I'll just stop at that. I'll shoot 3-minute exposures. And I don't have to worry about guiding or anything. With narrowband, very faint light comes in. We do narrowband imaging, and I usually can't get away with only 3 minutes. And we have to expose a little bit longer because, again, the narrowband data, very few photons are coming through. And you've got to make sure that whatever signal is there is at least higher than the read noise of the camera. Once you're above the read noise of the camera, you can just stack as many images as you want to get whatever signal noise ratio you're going to be happy with. So the next slide, I have an example of showing what we do. We stack our images or combine them. So again, this is actually, I think these were 1-minute exposures, and I took 60 of them. And on the left-hand side, you can see the 1-minute exposures, all nice smooth image. And on the right-hand side, this is a single 1-minute exposure. So not only is that image clean, but there's details that are in there, very fine details in that nebula. This was part of the Pelican, by the way. There are fine details in there that just look like a big kind of blob. When you stack them all together, those details kind of come out. If I had a laser pointer and I could point, I might point out a couple. But the image is much cleaner and more of the details are visible because they're really emerging out of the noise quite a bit better.
So as Claude mentioned, though, your limit is how long can you track. So tracking stars is my next slide. Star trail image because, well, the Earth is rotating. And it doesn't matter how good your optics and camera are, if you can't track, you're dead in water. So I might be a little biased, but a lot of people agree with me. Plus, I think bias is fine. It just makes being right more fun. I think the mount is the most important part of your imaging rig. If you have okay optics, you can work on that in post and clean it up. If you have an okay camera, you can take lots more exposures, or you can work on that, in pix and sight and so forth. But if you can't track and you can't expose long enough to get the data you need, there's nothing you can do to recover that. And I am not going to do a commercial for Paramounts. My next slide. This is actually something I did. I'm not proud of it, but anything is better than nothing. If you can just track for 30 seconds, that will give you so much more data to work with than if you can't track at all. So again, just about anything is better than nothing. Some things about the mount. The mount being the most important part of your image train. On the next slide. Typically, we say put at least half of your budget into the mount. Don't push the stated limit. Go ahead through all of the work in this quad. There's a common rule of half. You see, when the mount says it can carry 30 pounds, it's like, well, that's for visual. If you're doing imaging, you should cut that in half. And that's correct if it's a visual mount. So if you buy a visual mount from something made in China, and you want to adapt it for astrophotography, you should probably cut that number in half, because tracking all of those tolerances become way more critical when you're imaging. However, if you buy a mount designed for astrophotography, not just one of our mounts, but any of our worthy competitors, Astrophysics, Takahashi, Iaptron, and if I'm not mentioning, I'm just trying to whip some off. Some Skywatcher mounts are pretty good. Those mounts designed for photography you can pretty much hold them to what they say. This is a photographic mount, and it holds 40 pounds. You should be able to put 40 pounds on, unless the manufacturer's being kind of swarmy about it. Never happens. So different kinds of mounts on the next slide. This is my one of my early telescopes, LX200. I started just like everybody else. These are a great choice for visual astronomy using the hand paddle of the computer. And I think for these slides, Claude, you can just go ahead through all the bullets and throw them all up at the same time. Some advantages of these types of mounts. They're real easy to align. They do suffer from field rotation. Now, if you try to do photography on one of this, as it tracks across the sky, the field rotates. So whatever you're shooting, not only could it drift out of view, but it actually rotates in place. Now you can buy a really expensive rotator and put it on the back, and as of this time, I'm not aware of an amateur rotator system for astrophotography. But if you'd like to spend $300,000 or $400,000 on a professional system, you could certainly do that. So typically what we do is we'll use an equatorial mount on the next slide. And the axis of rotation is, we usually align it with Polaris, or actually near Polaris, to be super accurate. And that way it's lined up with the Earth's rotational axis. And then there's a motor that rotates that whole assembly at the same rate that the Earth rotates at. Only it rotates it in the opposite direction. So now whatever you point it at, theoretically, it should stay right in your field of view, and you should be able to do exposures for as long as you want. You don't get any rotation, and you can image forever. Of course, it's not like that simple. There's flexures and slight misalignments in the system that limit how long you can track. A really solid mount with a good polar alignment at a moderate focal length can usually go for a couple of minutes. And as you spend more money and spend more time and effort into firming up your imaging system, You can often go several minutes at a time, and then we get into auto guiding. We put another camera on there to track a star, or we do some sophisticated mount modeling and those sorts of things so that we can take longer image. So options for equatorial mounts. One of the easiest, especially if you bought an Altaz, I went this route. And again, I'm not very mechanically inclined, so I know people who do this and get great results, so I'm not saying the technique is bad, but I'm going to say it was a disaster for me with my 6 thumbs. I had an LX200 and I got a wedge, and if you put it on here, you can kind of align this axis to the north. You get into some problems. It's difficult. It was difficult for me to polar align. Plus, if you put a camera on the back, the camera wants to run into the mount as you slew around. And so this is an option, and again, a lot of people go this route, and if you've already spent more than your wife will allow, or your spouse, I should say, on an expensive telescope, the wedge is a pretty affordable add-on. I did that before. This was my vocation. Fortunately, my wife doesn't mind what I spend anymore because that's my work. As long as you're getting a paycheck, do whatever you want. Love America.
Did you get
the most common on the next slide is just a typical German equatorial mount. These are probably the most popular with amateur imagers. They're very easy to polar align. Some of them even come with a polar scope right on the axis. You can put a camera on there. There are 100 ways to polar align your scope, and they all work. Which way is better really depends on how many thumbs you have and what works for you. So I would encourage you to find, try several ways of getting polar aligned. And I'm not going to say this is necessarily the easiest way or this is the hard way, because again, some people's brains are, some people are more right-brained than left-brained. And so what seems easy for one person is really complicated for another. There is this one little issue with most equatorial mounts called the meridian flip. And that is, if you think about it, if you point at an object and you track it across the sky, as the object goes overhead and passes over, your telescope is now upside down, tracking the object as it moves to the other part of the sky. And it's very easy to run the back of the telescope into the mount. And if you've got a big expensive camera on there with a bunch of wires and things, you don't want to run that into the mount. So a lot of times, as the object crosses overhead, we call that the meridian, we stop imaging and we flip the mount around the opposite way. It does a little song and dance, and then starts tracking it the other way. So that way the telescope is never upside down. And some mounts will only let you go a few minutes past the meridian. Some will let you go as far past the meridian as you want. But if you don't do that flip at some point, you may run into yourself. And that usually is a bad day. I know I woke up in the morning, my alarm didn't go off. Or the third night I'm imaging in a room, I didn't hear the alarm, and I go out bleary-eyed into the backyard, and I was going beep, 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 beep. And there's unhappiness ensues. Okay, so another type of imaging, though, to get into that's also very rewarding and also very different is planetary or lunar or solar imaging. I imagine there's quite a bit of solar work going on up there. Solar is like my least competent field, but I do a lot of lunar imaging, and I do some planetary imaging, and I do some solar imaging. These objects are really compared to high objects for the moon compared to the nebula. We do not need a high accuracy mount that can track 20 minutes on a single exposure. And so what we'll do is we'll use a video camera, which I really don't like the term video camera. I think video camera's term will be obsolete in a few years. All a video camera is a camera that can take pictures really, really fast. We have a digital chip. It gets a digital image. It downloads it to the computer digitally. And we don't use coaxial video signals plugged into a monitor anymore. There are certainly a lot of people who are doing that, but that's not the current state of the art for motion imaging. I'm sure there's also some very high-end applications that still do that, but in general, this is not what amateurs are doing. They've got a big Schmidt-Cassegrain in the backyard. Schmidt-Cassegrains are very It's a very affordable way to get a lot of aperture. And the reason we want a lot of aperture is not only does more aperture give us more light on deep sky objects, but for reasons, I'm just going to say, because of physics, and I understand it, but I don't understand it well enough to explain it in detail in the presentation. But because of physics, if you have a large aperture, you can actually get a little bit more detail and more resolution in an image. And we're trying to magnify the daylights out of these real tiny objects, and we want as much resolution as we can get. We typically will magnify planets and the moon and the sun as well, far more than we would any deep sky object, including small galaxies. And we can get away with that because these objects are so bright, and because we employ a technique called lucky imaging. Lucky imaging, if you go to the next slide, and I think you need to click twice to see the animation, this is what the moon looks like through a high power eyepiece. Well, this is also what the moon looks like to a camera under high magnification. And what you're seeing is turbulence due to the atmosphere. We call that seeing. And it's hard to take a sharp image of something that's moving. If you've ever tried to do photography of race cars or sporting events, you know you need a very high shutter frame rate in order to get nice sharp images. Well, it's not enough just to get a fast frame rate on these things because they're moving. So the atmosphere is also warping and distorting the image. So what we'll do is we'll take hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of images all at once. We'll save them in a video file. And then we'll use special software to load that video file and go through and look at all the different frames one at a time. Here's an image, here's an image, here's an image. And we can grade those images based on how sharp they are. And we can take just the sharpest images. Now, one thing you could do is just say, give me the sharpest of these 10,000 images. And then you could take that into Photoshop and process it. And you can actually get a fairly nice image. What we tend to do, though, is we stack lots of them. We'll stack several hundred or maybe 1,000 sharp images together, just like we do for deep sky. And we'll get a very smooth image. Now, the smooth image isn't as sharp as the individual image, so then we'll go after it and kind of sharpen it up a little bit in post-processing. If you try to sharpen an image that hasn't been smooth, you'll very often sharpen noise, or you'll see features that aren't actually there. So it's important that you have a nice smooth image, not be too terribly compromised. So the next few slides are just some images of some of my lunar work. These were shot at a pixel scale of 0.1 arcsecond per pixel, which is insane for deep sky astrophotography. You can't shoot at that kind of a pixel scale. But if you do lucky imaging and you take tens of thousands, and you live in Florida where the seeing is really good, and you shoot when the moon is right overhead, you can get images like this that are really close up. This was at 42,000 millimeters of focal length with a camera with real tiny pixels. And I did the math once, and it was 0.1 arcseconds. Typically, I try to shoot at 1 arcsecond per pixel here in Florida. So this is 10 times the resolution of what I can get on a typical deep sky object that I can get on the moon. But I can only do that because I employ this technique called lucky imaging. I just realized I've had my hand over my head. Relax. I'll see. And so, okay, so that sort of a whirlwind tour of astrophotography. Just sort of some of the basics, but there are things that I've run into people off the top that can get confused on some of these. So I hope this was helpful. And if anybody has any questions, yours, or at least another few minutes.
Okay, questions?
So on my telephoto lens for my camera, it has tons and tons of little elements in it.
I think you're going to have to, our microphone is not that great.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
But the cable's long.
I heard something about a telephoto lens.
Okay, so my telephoto lens has lots of elements in it that, you know, make it work perfectly or make Nikon more money, one or the other. The refractor telescopes, are they into putting lots of elements into them, or are they just basically the lens and an eyepiece and a prism?
That's a very good question. So, to repeat the question, both for everybody else and to make sure I understand it, you're saying, hey, I've got a telephoto lens and it has, 27 elements in it, and a refractor has one, or it's a triplet, and that's all it has in it. So, what is all that extra glass going to do to your image? Well, there are a couple of answers to that question. The main overarching question is it depends. How old is your lens will have an impact. The traditional advice on telephoto lenses, one that I live by myself, is a prime lens has fewer elements, so I like to use a prime lens instead of a zoom. So if you have a 70 to 300 millimeter zoom lens, for example, it has far more elements in it than a 300 millimeter prime lens does. So that's, in general, a prime lens should do better than a zoom. So the other question is, the other side of that is, well, even a prime lens has a lot of elements in it. And that's when I'm going to say, well, how old is it? There's this thing called economy of scales. And you can make a very high quality refractor and sell it for $10,000. And you can make a very high quality lens that costs $500,000 to make that camera lens. But the thing is, if you make $500,000 of those camera lenses, the cost per lens goes down. And now that's a $700 lens. And so camera lenses have technology in it that you can't hardly approach in the amateur market for telescopes. And I'm going to say the newer camera lenses are better at that. The reflective coatings inside the lens are really quite good. One thing I do, I don't buy a lens anymore until I rent it from Borrow Lenses, because I don't trust anybody's review online. So for $50, I'll get a nice lens for a week and I'll try it out, and if I like it, I'll buy it. And if I don't like it, I go, yeah, we got huge seagulls in the corner. That's not going to work. As a testament to how good those coatings are, in the May issue of Sky and Telescope, I wrote an article about the Dragonfly array. And the Dragonfly array is a hunt for ultra low surface brightness objects. And what they've got is 24 Canon 400 millimeter f2.8 lenses, all in an array. So it's like this big stack of 24 camera lenses. And they're making new discoveries and finding things that you can't find with your telescopes, because even the big telescopes, the light scatter is too much. So you can calibrate all you want, you can baffle all you want, but those big optics still have a lot of light scatter in it. And Canon has new nano coatings on it, and those coatings produce almost no scatter at all. So I'm going to say it depends on your camera lens, depends on how much you paid for it, depends on who made it, when it's made, your mileage may vary. But the old advice, there's a lot of old advice that we have to remember. Manufacturing technologies change, advances and breakthroughs, and things that were true 15 years ago, well, things that were true last year may not even be true today. But intuitively, you're not wrong. Intuitively, it's like, dude, I interviewed the scientists involved in the Dragonfly, Peter and Dr. Abraham. Dr. Abraham did good work, because he's like, dude, there's like 20 elements of glass in there. There's going to be scattered all over the place. There's no way this is going to work. And they're like, well, you know what? One test is worth 1,000 expert opinions. And they tried it, and it did work. And they made some great breakthrough discoveries with that system because of it. So.
Other questions?
Yeah, good question.
Just a comment. We're on the
Probably back off.
back off. Okay, we're on the approach route to LAX for a lot of airplanes, and taking a series of exposures is much safer than taking a 2-hour exposure in any case.
Right.
So around here, that would be essential.
And Byron also has one.
Oh,
Yeah. I live not too far from the Sanford Airport, and even down at my dark sky site up north of Miami, and until about 1 in the morning, planes are constantly going north and south over me. One thing you could do is when you stack images, if you get a satellite trail or a plane trail, you can stack with a statistical rejection. It'll use all of that image except where the plane trail was. So don't throw those images away. Go ahead and stack them and turn on the statistical rejection, and you can still use that data.
Oh, that's interesting.
I was wondering if that existed.
Yeah.
I have two questions. One, can you not use unsharp masks in digital imaging? Or is there some mechanism that you can use to do that?
Are you asking if it's possible to use unsharp mask with
Yes.
astro images?
No, for digital astro images.
They're all digital.
There's an unsharp mask feature in Photoshop. I've used it.
Okay. All right. And
So yeah.
can you give us some indication of the resolution impact of digital imaging versus film imaging?
Okay, so I was a coward when it came to film imaging. I shot the moon. I never did deep sky imaging. So what I know is that the more sensitive film grains were larger film grains. So it kind of corresponds with digital images. The larger pixels are more sensitive. Most cameras have more pixels packed in than fine-grained films of yesterday. I can't give you any numbers because I haven't studied it extensively, so I'm going to give you a generalization, which is it's a little more than an educated guess because it's things I've heard other people talking about. But I'm not an expert there, repeating other people I think is an expert. Is that a fair disclaimer?
It sounds like what you're saying is that the digital imaging does not do worse than film imaging under old Panatomic or something like that.
No. Current digital technology is much more resolution than film.
And also with digital, you can do dithering by moving a fraction of a pixel over and get basically super resolution that way. Yeah. And keep in mind with film, it was very difficult to do the analog of stacking.
The sensors are more sensitive than film ever was. And the sensors are mostly linear, so you don't get that reciprocity failure. So with film, you expose to a certain point, and then it stop accumulating signal. Sensors will keep an electronic sensor will keep accumulating signal until it overflows and saturates.
In other words, you're the only one that still uses film.
The comment was, Byron, you're the only one who still uses film. Or as we call it, analog. I have a question. When you're talking about lucky imaging and stacking software, does the stacking software select for the resolving power over the entire field, or does it look at sub-apertures? Because, of course, if you have an image, you can have differential seeing across your field. So does that software actually select sub-apertures and stack those independent, or do they just blindly stack the entire full frame?
The software I like to use is called Astrostacker, and with Astrostacker you create alignment points.
Okay.
So it goes through and it finds features in the image, and then as each image comes through, it looks for where that feature is in the other image, and then it warps the image to line them up.
But
I think that's what you're asking.
That's de-stretching, but I was also wondering if it selects maybe a sub-aperture and say, okay, on this frame, this small sub-region has very good seeing. We reject the rest of the image, but I'm going to save this sub-frame.
I see.
Or does it just do de-stretching?
It just does, well, I can't authoritatively answer that.
Okay.
I think it just de-stretches.
Okay, I wasn't quite sure about that.
But I've thought about that myself. It's like, well, you could pull little pieces out of all of these, but I don't know that anybody else has done it yet.
There's some Fourier techniques that Software Biz might be really interested in implementing, maybe. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, well, join me in thanking Richard for spending his time with us. Thank you so much, very much
You're welcome.
appreciated.
All right? You guys have a good night.
And next time you're in Big Bear, please stop by and take a look at our moderately
I will.
large telescope here.
I will. Okay. Thanks a lot. Bye,
Take
guys.
care. Thanks so much. Good night.
Bye-bye.